blood, ink, and cold espresso. Dominic sat in a dead-end diner, pen hovering over the document that would end his empire. He was ready to surrender, until a waitress with aching feet and a sharp eye leaned over to pour his coffee, and realized he was signing his own death warrant. Neon light bled through the horizontal blinds, painting sickly orange stripes across the diner's cracked linoleum floor. Camille shifted her weight from her left foot to her right. A dull, throbbing pain radiated from her arches all the way up to her lower back. She smelled like old frying oil, stale bleach, and the cheap vanilla perfume she used to mask the first two. 3 men sat in the back booth. They had been there for 2 hours, nursing black coffees that had long gone cold. Dominic sat in the center. He had the sharp, striking bone structure of his Korean ancestors, but his eyes carried the hollow, exhausted weight of a man who had not slept in a week. His tailored charcoal suit felt violently out of place against the cracked red vinyl of the booth. Beside him sat a heavy-set man named Richard, wearing an off-the-rack brown suit that smelled faintly of sour sweat and cheap mints. Across from them sat Gregory, a lawyer with a complexion like wet dough and a gold tie clip that caught the ugly fluorescent lighting. Camille gripped a damp rag. It reeked of ammonia. She dragged it methodically across an empty table 3 feet away from them, keeping her head down. Survival in a late-night diner meant blending into the background. You became part of the wallpaper. Thick sheaves of paper lay scattered across their table. Legal documents, the heavy parchment kind that cost more per page than Camille made in an hour. "Just sign it, Dom," Gregory said. His voice was smooth, greased with an artificial sympathy that made Camille's teeth grind. "The holding company absorbs the debt. You walk away clean. No federal indictments. No messy RICO charges. It's a clean slate." Dominic stared at the paper. He didn't move. He looked like a statue carved from tension. Camille dunked her rag into the plastic sanitizing bucket. Water splashed onto her non-slip shoes. She wrung it out, her dark knuckles turning grey with the strain. She didn't care about Mafia politics. She didn't care about holding companies. But she knew the smell of a trap. She had seen that exact same greasy look on the face of the bank manager who foreclosed on her father's auto repair shop 5 years ago. Gregory tapped a Mont Blanc pen against the table. Click, tap, click, tap. "Liquidation is painful, I know. But it's bankruptcy or a federal cell block. The board is taking the hit for you." "My father built this," Dominic said. His voice was a low rasp. It sounded like tires grinding over gravel. "He bled for these properties." "Your father is dead," Richard muttered, not looking up from his phone. Dominic's jaw twitched, a single muscle leaping beneath his jawline. He reached for his ceramic coffee mug. It was empty. Camille saw the movement. It was her job to see it. She grabbed the glass carafe of decaf from the warming plate, the plastic handle warm and slightly sticky against her palm. She walked over, keeping her posture submissive, eyes lowered. "Refill, gentlemen?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, raspy from exhaustion. "Just pour it," Gregory snapped, waving a hand dismissively without looking at her. Camille stepped closer to Dominic. She leaned in to pour the dark liquid into his mug. As she did, her gaze drifted downward. She couldn't help it. Numbers had always made sense to her. Before her father's stroke, before the hospital bills swallowed her college tuition, she had been a year away from an accounting degree. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't have ulterior motives. The document sitting directly beneath Dominic's left hand was titled Schedule C, Asset Transfer and Debt Reallocation. The coffee poured in a thin, dark stream. The steam curled upward, smelling of burnt chicory. Camille's eyes flicked over the dense paragraphs. Her brain automatically passed the legalese. Subsidiary absorption. Liability waiver. Clause 4. B. In the event of primary insolvency, all liquid assets and real estate portfolios shall be routed to the Cayman-registered entity, Ouroboros Holdings, effectively shielding them from the aforementioned bankruptcy filing. Wait. She blinked, a bead of sweat tracing a cold path down her spine. The coffee splashed slightly against the rim of the mug. She looked at the next page, just peeking out from underneath. It wasn't a bankruptcy liquidation. It was an aggressive asset transfer. They weren't wiping Dominic's debt. They were stealing his collateral and leaving the debt in his name. The holding company wouldn't absorb the liability. It would only absorb the wealth. If he signed that paper, he wouldn't just go bankrupt. He would go to prison for defrauding his own creditors, while Gregory and whoever owned Ouroboros Holdings walked away with $1 billion empire. Dominic picked up the Mont Blanc pen. He uncapped it. The gold nib glinted. Camille stopped pouring. The carafe hung in the air. "Don't do it!" a voice screamed in her head. "Walk away. It's not your business. These men carry guns. These men kill people. Go back to the counter and wipe down the pie case." Dominic pressed the pen to the signature line. The ink began to bleed into the thick paper. Camille's heart hammered against her ribs. It felt like a trapped bird. Her hands were shaking so badly the glass carafe rattled against the ceramic mug. Clink, clink, clink. Dominic paused. He looked up. His eyes met hers. They were incredibly dark, utterly devoid of warmth. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Camille swallowed hard. Her throat was sandpaper. She looked at the pen, then at Gregory's pale, sweaty face, and finally back to Dominic. "You're making a mistake," Camille blurted out. The words tasted like copper in her mouth. She immediately wished she could swallow them back down. Silence slammed into the booth. It wasn't a quiet silence. It was heavy, suffocating, like the air right before a thunderstorm. Gregory's head snapped up. His doughy face flushed a violent, ugly crimson. "Excuse me, get the hell away from this table." Richard dropped his phone. His thick hand instinctively moved toward the inside of his cheap brown jacket. Camille flinched, stepping back so fast her rubber sole caught on the cracked linoleum. She stumbled, gripping the hot coffee carafe to keep from dropping it. Her breathing turned shallow, erratic. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Dominic didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't yell. He just raised a hand, 2 fingers extended. A micro gesture. Richard froze, his hand still inside his jacket. Dominic slowly turned his head to look at Camille. Up close, she could see the faint scarring along his jawline, the deep violet shadows under his eyes. "What did you say?" Dominic's voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the hum of the diner's refrigerators like a scalpel. "Listen, boss, she's just a waitress," Gregory started, his voice pitching an octave higher. "Shut up, Greg," Dominic said softly. He didn't look at the lawyer. His eyes remained locked on Camille. "Speak." Camille's hands were trembling violently now. She put the coffee carafe down on the table with a loud, ungraceful thud. She wiped her hands on her stained apron, desperately trying to ground herself in the rough texture of the canvas. "I didn't mean to pry," she stammered, hating how weak her voice sounded. She forced herself to stand taller, squaring her shoulders. She was black, poor, and wearing a uniform that smelled like grease. She knew exactly how invisible she was to men like this. But she wasn't stupid. Clause 4B. Dominic's eyebrows twitched. "What about it?" "It's a blind transfer," Camille said, her voice steadying as the numbers took over her panic. "They're telling you it's a liquidation, But it's not. The liability isn't moving to the holding company, only the assets are. Gregory let out a sharp, breathless laugh. It sounded frantic. This is absurd. Dom, you're not seriously listening to a girl who pours coffee for a living. She doesn't even know what she's reading. Camille looked at Gregory. The dismissal in his eyes was familiar. It was the same look the bank manager had given her father. Anger flared in her chest, hot and bright, burning away the fear. I know what predatory structuring looks like, Camille snapped, pointing a dark finger at the parchment. Look at page 4, paragraph 12, subsection C. The debt remains attached to the primary signatory. That's you. She shifted her gaze back to Dominic. If you sign that, Ouroboros Holdings gets your real estate, your liquid cash, everything. And when the feds come looking for the missing money, they won't find a bankrupt company. They'll find you. You're not signing bankruptcy papers. You're signing a confession. Dominic stared at her. He didn't blink. The silence stretched again, thick with sudden, terrifying implications. Slowly, deliberately, Dominic lowered the pen. He didn't look at Gregory. He simply pulled the thick stack of papers toward him, his thumb flipping to page 4. The rustle of the heavy paper was the only sound in the diner. Camille watched his eyes scan the text. She watched the realization hit him. It wasn't a dramatic gasp or an explosive outburst. It was a subtle, horrifying shift in his posture. The exhaustion in his shoulders vanished, replaced by a rigid, terrifying stillness. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Gregory pushed his chair back. The metal legs screeched against the floor. Dom, listen. It's just legal jargon. It protects the board. Dominic's hand moved faster than Camille could track. 1 second he was reading. The next, he had Gregory by the throat, slamming the lawyer's head down onto the table. The ceramic coffee mug shattered, hot, dark liquid spraying across the legal documents and splashing onto Camille's apron. Camille gasped, jumping back. Richard didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his eyes wide, watching his boss. Dominic leaned over the table, holding Gregory down. The lawyer thrashed, his face turning purple, his hands clawing uselessly at Dominic's iron grip. Ouroboros Holdings, Dominic whispered. His voice was no longer a rasp. It was smooth, cold, and entirely devoid of mercy. That's the shell company my uncle uses to launder his casino revenue. Gregory gurgled, spit bubbling at the corner of his mouth. Dominic released him, shoving him backward. Gregory collapsed into the booth, gasping for air, clutching his bruised throat. Dominic picked up the ruined, coffee-stained papers. He tore them slowly in half, then in half again. He dropped the wet confetti onto the table. He stood up. He smoothed the lapels of his charcoal suit. Then he turned to Camille. She was pressed against the adjacent table, her heart hammering against her ribs, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She expected him to kill her. She had seen too much. She had ruined a multi-million-dollar coup. Dominic reached into his jacket pocket. Camille flinched, closing her eyes. Instead of the cold metal of a gun, she heard the soft rustle of fabric. She opened her eyes. Dominic was holding out a crisp, white linen handkerchief. "Your hand," he said quietly. Camille looked down. When she had stumbled back, a shard of the shattered coffee mug had nicked her knuckle. A small drop of bright red blood was welling up against her dark skin. She hesitated, then slowly reached out and took the handkerchief. The fabric was impossibly soft. It smelled of cedar and expensive soap. "What's your name?" Dominic asked. "Camille," she whispered. Dominic nodded slowly, his dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You just saved my life, Camille," he said. He didn't smile. It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement of fact. He pulled a thick money clip from his pocket, peeled off $500 bills, and laid them on the table next to the ruined documents. "Buy a new apron," he said. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit. Richard grabbed Gregory by the collar of his expensive suit, hauling the coughing lawyer out of the booth and dragging him toward the door. The bell above the diner door jingled cheerfully as they left. Camille stood alone in the dim, sickly light, clutching the cedar-scented handkerchief to her bleeding knuckle, listening to the roar of a luxury engine fading into the night. She looked at the $500 sitting in a puddle of spilled coffee. She knew with a chilling certainty that this wasn't the last time she would see him. Sleep refused to come. For 3 nights, Camille lay on a mattress that sagged in the middle, listening to the rhythmic, violent clanking of her apartment's radiator. The $500 Dominic had left on the diner table sat in a cracked coffee mug on her nightstand. It felt radioactive. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the dark, ruined spray of coffee across the legal documents, and the terrifying casual speed of Dominic's hand wrapping around Gregory's throat. She had washed the blood out of the linen handkerchief in her tiny bathroom sink, scrubbing the white fabric against the porcelain until her knuckles ached. But even after hanging it over the shower rod to dry, it still smelled faintly of cedar, expensive soap, and the metallic tang of violence. She shouldn't have kept it. She should have thrown it in the dumpster behind the diner. But she didn't. Wednesday night hit the diner like a blunt instrument. A local factory had let out early, flooding the booths with loud, exhausted men demanding meatloaf and cheap beer. Camille worked on autopilot. Her lower back burned, a hot wire of pain stretching from her spine to her hips. She smelled like burnt onions and bleach. At 2 a.m., the rush finally died. Camille grabbed 2 heavy black trash bags, the plastic stretching tight over jagged edges of tin cans and coffee grounds. She pushed through the back door into the alley. The air was freezing, slicing through her thin uniform. The alley smelled of rotting cabbage and wet asphalt. She swung the first bag into the dumpster with a heavy grunt. It hit the bottom with a wet thud. She reached for the second. A shadow detached itself from the brick wall. Camille gasped, dropping the bag. It split open, spilling coffee grounds and half-eaten fries across the wet pavement. She scrambled backward, her heart slamming against her ribs, her hands instantly flying up to protect her face. Raw, ugly panic choked her. She expected a mugger. She expected a gun. Dominic stepped into the yellow pool of the security light. He wore a long wool overcoat, collar turned up against the wind. The hollow exhaustion in his eyes was still there, but the stillness was gone. He looked like a coiled spring. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said. His voice was low, carrying over the distant hum of city traffic. Camille pressed her back against the freezing metal of the diner door. Her breath plumed in the cold air. She hated how badly she was shaking. "You shouldn't be here. You gave me the money. We're done." "We're not," Dominic said softly. He didn't step closer, giving her space. It was a calculated move, and they both knew it. Gregory sang. "Before my men even broke a sweat, he gave up the entire structure. My Uncle Simon has been siphoning funds from the holding company for 3 years. He masked it as operational losses." "I don't care," Camille said, her voice cracking. "I don't want to know this. I poured your coffee. That's it. Go hire an accountant." "I have an army of accountants," Dominic replied, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "They're all on Simon's payroll. They signed off on the Ouroboros transfer. Every single ledger in my office is poisoned. I can't trust a single number on my own servers. He finally closed the distance between them. The smell of cedar and cold winter air washed over her, completely overpowering the garbage. You saw the trap in 10 seconds, Dominic said. You saw what men with Ivy League degrees and six-figure retainers were paid to hide. I need someone outside the family, someone who doesn't care about the politics, who just sees the math. Camille hugged her arms across her chest. I'm a waitress. I drop plates. I forgot table 4's side salad tonight. I'm not a forensic auditor. You were 2 semesters away from your CPA before your father's shop went under, Dominic said. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her stomach dropped. A cold, furious heat flushed her cheeks. You looked into me. Of course I did. He didn't sound apologetic. He sounded entirely pragmatic. I know about the hospital bills. I know about the collection agencies calling you 3 times a day. I know you're living on ramen and instant coffee to keep your landlord from changing the locks. Screw you, Camille hissed, tears of pure frustration stinging her eyes. It was a raw, impulsive reaction. She didn't care that he was a mafia boss. She hated being exposed. She hated being poor. Dominic didn't flinch at her anger. He simply reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He held it out. $50,000, Dominic said. Cash. For 1 week of your time. You sit in a room. You look at raw bank statements. You trace the money Simon stole, and you show me exactly how he hid it. Camille stared at the envelope. $50,000. It was an impossible number. It was the end of the collection calls. It was a new mattress. It was her father's gravestone, finally paid off. Her stomach twisted violently. It was blood money. If she took it, she was crossing a line she could never uncross. She would belong to his world. She looked up at his face. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't manipulating her with charm. He was bleeding out, financially, and betrayed by his own blood. And he was offering her a lifeline because she was his only lifeboat. Camille swallowed hard. Her hands trembled as she reached out. Her dark fingers brushed against his pale skin as she took the envelope. It was terrifyingly heavy. 1 week, Camille whispered, the words tasting like ash. Fluorescent lights hummed a low, maddening note above her head. Camille rubbed her eyes, pulling her fingers away smeared with cheap mascara. Her vision swam. She was sitting in a windowless room on the 42nd floor of a commercial high-rise. The air conditioning was aggressive, raising goosebumps on her bare arms. The desk in front of her was buried under mountains of paper. Wire transfer logs, dummy invoices, offshore routing numbers. It smelled like ozone, hot printer ink, and the bitter black coffee she had been chain drinking for 3 days. Dominic stood by the locked steel door. He had barely spoken to her since bringing her here. He just watched. He operated in a state of hypervigilance that set her teeth on edge. Every time his phone buzzed, the muscle in his jaw leapt. "You're crowding me," Camille snapped, dropping a red pen onto the desk. It clattered loudly against the wood. Dominic blinked, looking up from his phone. He stepped away from the door, moving to the small kitchenette in the corner. "Apologies, I'm not used to waiting." "Well, learn," she muttered, massaging her temples. She was too exhausted to be terrified of him anymore. The sheer volume of numbers had stripped away her fear, replacing it with a grinding, familiar frustration. It was a labyrinth. Simon hadn't just stolen the money. He had shattered it into thousands of microscopic pieces and scattered it across dozens of dummy corporations. It was brilliant, evil accounting. But it wasn't perfect. Camille pulled a stack of invoices closer. They were from a concrete supplier in New Jersey. She had seen the same address on a trucking manifest 2 days ago, but the company name was different. She leaned over the desk, her face inches from the paper. She ran her finger down the column of routing numbers. Wait. She cross-referenced it with a ledger from a casino development project in Macau. Her heart gave a sudden, sharp kick. The numbers matched. It was a fractional discrepancy. Less than 1% skimmed off the top of every concrete pour, rerouted through a shell company, and funneled back into Simon's personal trust. "Got you," she whispered. Dominic paused, a glass of water halfway to his mouth. "What?" "He didn't take large lumps," Camille said, her voice trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the raw thrill of the hunt. She stood up, knocking her chair backward. It scraped harshly against the concrete floor. She grabbed a fistful of highlighters and papers, marching over to the large glass whiteboard mounted on the wall. Dominic walked up behind her. She could feel the heat radiating off him. "Look," Camille said, uncapping a black marker. She drew a hurried, messy diagram. "You were looking for massive withdrawals. You were looking for millions missing from the operational budget. But Simon never touched the principal. He skimmed the margins." She slashed a line through a vendor name. "He overbilled on materials, concrete, steel, labor hours. He authorized a 5% markup on every construction project in your portfolio for the last 36 months. The money was paid out to these 3 vendors." She circled 3 names. "But these vendors don't exist. They're phantom LLCs registered to the same P.O. box in Delaware." Dominic stared at the board. The reflection of the fluorescent lights caught in his dark eyes. "How much?" he asked softly. 17 million, Camille said. The number felt heavy in her mouth. "He bled you out 1 drop at a time, and he used the inflated invoices to artificially tank your quarterly profits. That's why you were facing bankruptcy. He engineered the failure so you would sign over the remaining assets to Ouroboros." Silence filled the room. It was thick, violent, and absolute. Dominic slowly reached out and touched the glass board. His fingers traced the circle Camille had drawn around his uncle's shell company. His expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room plummeted. Camille stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her hollow and suddenly terrified. She had just handed a Mafia boss the definitive proof of a familial betrayal. She knew what happened next. Men were going to die. Blood was going to spill, and she had drawn the map. "I'm done," she whispered. "I found it. I want to go home." Dominic turned to look at her. The cold fury in his eyes vanished for a split second, replaced by something entirely different. It wasn't gratitude. It was recognition. He saw the horror in her face, the desperate need to wash her hands of him. He reached into his jacket. For a terrifying second, Camille thought he was going to kill her to tie up the loose end. Instead, he pulled out his keys. He tossed them onto the desk. They landed with a heavy clatter. "My driver is downstairs," Dominic said. His voice was a raspy murmur. "He'll take you wherever you want to go. The money in the envelope is yours." Camille didn't move towards the door. She looked at him, truly looked at him, standing alone in a sterile room filled with evidence of his own family's treachery. He was a monster, yes, but in that moment, he just looked like a man drowning in an ocean of his own blood. She turned away, grabbing her cheap canvas coat. She walked toward the steel door. As she gripped the cold metal handle, she stopped. She didn't look back. She just let the silence stretch for a moment, the weight of the last 3 days pressing down on her shoulders. "Make it clean," Camille whispered. She opened the door and walked out. leaving him alone in the neon-lit tomb of his empire. If this raw, gritty plunge into loyalty, betrayal, and high-stakes survival kept you on the edge of your seat, don't let the story end here. Hit that like button to show your support, and share this video with anyone who loves intense, grounded crime dramas with unexpected heroes. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next dark, thrilling chapter of our original stories. What would you do in Camille's shoes? Tell us in the comments below.